Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Sorry for my absence the last couple of days. More to come, more travel. And in the meantime, today we're going to learn Bava Basra Daf Kuf Mem Zayin. We're going to be starting about 9, 10 lines down at the single dot there. It says Amar Reb Zera. And today we're going to go about 2/3 of the way down on Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. It's a shorter Amud, but we'll leave over the last 7 or 8 lines. And then tomorrow we'll move on to the next daf. Baruch Hashem. Today we're going to be discussing the halachos of a shchiv meira, and we've seen these halachos before. And the most well-known halacha about a shchiv meira is that his verbal declarations while he's on his deathbed are binding. This is very unique within the framework of halacha. It's not shocking. We have precedents in halacha about a neder. If you say that you're going to do something, there's a certain mitzias that's created. But typically, in regards to kinyanim, that would be a chiddush. That would be a chiddush. So how do we know that the language of a shchiv meira, the matnas shchiv meira, as it's referred to here in the Gemara today, how do we know that that works? And on what level does that work? Is that the oraisa or the rabbana? So the Gemara starts off as follows. Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rab, minayin lematnas shchiv meira shehi min Torah. How do we know that matnas shchiv meira is a din de oraisa? We're going to see later that not everybody agrees to that perhaps it's only a din de rabbana. But according to this first direction of the Gemara, how do we know that a matnas shchiv meira is a din de oraisa, that if a shchiv meira says on his deathbed, I want to give X amount of dollars to person Y, that's binding? Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, and we have spoken about this pasuk many times, va'avartem es nachalaso levito. So the pasuk says that we give over the nachala to a daughter, namely if a son is not there, or if the son was never born, it was just all girls, or the son died, whatever the case may be, then the father's nachala goes, instead of it going to the son, it goes to the daughter. So we see that there's a switch, a ha'avara. And yesh lecha ha'avara acheres. And there is in fact another type of ha'avara, shehi kazu, that's no different than the transfer of a Yerusha, that instead of it going to a boy, it goes to the girl. Ve'ezozo, that's matnas shchiv meira. So we learn from this pasuk, a din doraisa, pasuk shteit in Chumash, that we know that a matnas shchiv meira is real. It's a din doraisa, and the language of ha'avartam is this is what some of the Rishonim write. The language of ha'avartam is actually extra. You don't need to use that language. If there's no girl, then you give it to if there's no boy, then you give it to the girl. So the language of ha'avartam is a shtickle chiddush of a language. And if you look in the Rashbam over here, just to the right, Shneimar v'avartam nachala, so he gives us the other option to have a matzah in the michtav. It could have said, Ish ki yamusu ben ein lo nachalaso levito v'avartem yiserahu. So now really the Rashbam is highlighting, he's underscoring why there is a uniqueness in this pasuk, because the pasuk says v'avartem, and that's an extra word. It could have just said nachalaso levito. So that's answer number one. Answer number two, Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua Mehacha, he says, no, I disagree with you. It's not from the pasuk of Ha'avartem, but rather from another pasuk, one pasuk later. The previous pasuk was Chav Zayin Ches in Bamidbar. This is Chav Zayin Tes. The pasuk says, "V'nesatem es nachalaso la'achiv," and he says, it says, "V'nesatem." The language is that you should give over the nachla to your brother. Yesh lecha nasin acheres shikazu. There's another type of nesina that's no different than the one in this pasuk. Ve'ezozo. That's also matnas shchiv meira. So one way or the other, it seems that according to these Amoraim, that we have a din d'oraisa, that a matnas shchiv meira is binding. When a person's on his deathbed, he's in the throes of Misa, and he says, I want, again, X amount of dollars to go to person Y, so the din is that it's binding, din d'oraisa, either from the pasuk of Avartem or from the pasuk V'nasatem. Now, as would be the case, we want to understand why Shita number 1 doesn't hold like Shita number 2, and why Shita number 2 doesn't hold like Shita number 1. So 5 lines before the wide lines, a third of the way down. Rav Nachman, my time lo amar mi v'ha'avartem. Why does Rav Nachman try and find another pasuk? The first drasha was beautiful. The drasha that we saw in the name of Reb Zera Amar Rab was perfect. It says the Gemara, no. The reason why Rav Nachman didn't like the pasuk of ha'avartem is because it's already being used. The pasuk says, "Hahu," the pasuk of ha'avartem miboile lichad Rebbe. We need it because of the sheet of Rabbi Tanya. We have a brisa. This is a brisa we've seen already. We saw it about 40 blot ago, 38 blot ago to be exact. The Gemara says, Rabbi Omer, b'chula nemra behen nesina, v'kan nemra ha'avara. In many cases in Torah, it speaks about nesina. In our case, it speaks about ha'avara. So the Torah deviated from the standard language of giving or from transferring. Why? Normally we say nesina. So it says the Gemara, the only time we ever see an inheritance go from one Shevet to another is Elabas, Ho'eluvena Uvaila Yorshinosa. So there, that brisa indicates that the pasuk of Avartim teaches us a chiddush, that we have an avenue through which money that was in one shevet can be transferred to another shevet. It's only through a female inheriting and then marrying into another shevet. And if she dies, then the money taka does go to the other shevet. So says the Gemara that the reason why Rav Nachman doesn't like the answer of Rav Zera Marav, that the pasuk that teaches us that a matna shchiv meira is binding midorais as the pasuk of Avartim, is because that pasuk of Avartim was used already to teach me that there are scenarios whereby the Yerusha from Shevet Levi can go, well, that's a bad example, but the Yerusha from any one Shevet can go to another Shevet. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. That's the reason why Rav Nachman doesn't hold of Rav Zera. And the first of the long lines, the Gemara asks, "Rav Zera, my time lo amar mi v'nosatem." Okay, so you have another problem. You, the Shita of Rav Zera, he's got a great point. We have a brisa already that says that Vavartam is used to teach us that there are scenarios where Yerusha can go from one Sheva to another. So why are you pressing this pasuk to try and learn another thing from the same pasuk? Rabbi already used it. So he said, and this is, it sounds like a simple argument, but it's strong enough that's making him use the same drasha twice. Says the Gemara, you can't do that because urche de krahu. Says the Gemara, my time la'amrami v'nasatim, because urche de krahu, that's a common word, and therefore you cannot learn this din from there. Rav Menasya bar Yirmiyah Amar Mehacha, he gives a third pasuk as an example. Let's remember our framing. What was our question? From where do we know that a matna shchiv meira is a din deoraisa? And where is this pasuk that we're learning right now coming from? From Malachim. So we know Divrei Torah mi Divrei Kabbalah lo yalfinon. This is a me question. I don't know what the answer is, but it seems odd to me because we're learning right now this third response. We saw the answer of Rav Zera in the name of Rav. We saw the answer of Rav Nachman in the name of Rabba Bar Avua. And now we're seeing on the second of the long lines, Rav Menasya Bar Yirmiyah, and he quotes a pasuk from Sefer Malachim. Bayamim Mahim, Chala Chizkiyahu Lamus. He was sick. Chizkiyahu was about to die. V'yavo Lav Yeshav and Amotz Navi, and Yeshayahu and Amotz Yeshayahu. The Navi came over to Vayomer Elav Ko Amar Hashem Tzav Leveisecha Ki Meisa Tov Lo Sechiyeh. You need to make a tzav. You need to make a tzava. You need to make a will, and you're not going to live any longer. And what does the pasuk say? B'tzava be'alma, just a regular will. What does this mean? A regular will? B'tzava be'alma means that you can just say out loud what you think. You can just say your feelings. Matna shchiv meira is binding. So that's the third Mare Makom where we see that there's some degree of again, it's hard to call it a din d'oraisa even though the pasuk is, if the pasuk's from Malachim, but that is the framing of the Gemara, that it sounds like it's d'oraisa. Let's see the fourth answer. We're 4 lines into the wide lines, halfway down. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nehiyeh bidbaro. Rami bar Yechezkel amar mehacha v'Achitofel. The pasuk says by Achitofel. This is a pasuk in Shmuel. Achitofel ra kilo nesa tzaso. His advice wasn't taken. And he went back to his home. Vayitzav el beso vayechanak. He strangled himself. He killed himself. Vayamos vayikaber bekever aviv. That's what the pasuk says. And it says vayitzav el beso vayechanak. What does that teach us? B'tzava ve'alma. Same exact idea. That because the pasuk says tzav in a very, you should give your commandments, you should give your will, last will and testament in a very pashut way. So l'chora, that means even if it's not written down. So we have 4 Mari Mekomos. We have all of these shitas that we've seen so far, end of the sugya. All of this is, well, it's not really the end of the sugya. We're going to interrupt it with an agarata and then come back to it in a moment. But from this first blush of the Gemara, it seems that we really have strong Mari Mekomos in the beginning, 2 psukim in Chumash, and then we have 2 psukim in Tanakh that teach us about this idea. So it says the Gemara as follows: Tanu Rabbanon, Shlosha Dvarim Tziva Achitofel es Bana. Achitofel gave 3 different tzavos to his children. Al tihu b'machlokes. Don't involve yourself, halabai. Don't involve yourself in machlokes. Ve'al timredu b'malchus beis David. And do not rebel against malchus beis David. And v'yom tov shel atzeres barur zarochitim. And if on atzeres, which is shavuos, it's barur, it's clear outside, there's not a lot of clouds, so then zarochitim, it's a good year to plant wheat. What do we know? We're not agricultural people. Mar Zutra Amar, no, you've misunderstood. The third condition that Achitophel told his sons was not when the sky is barur you should plant chitim, but rather balul, Amar balul, when it's cloudy, when it's unclear up in the skies. You look up and there's a stir. You see all the clouds are not doing their thing. Itmar, Amre Nardoi, Mishmed Rav Yaakov, Lo Barur Barur Mamish. The first shita that says Barur doesn't mean a perfectly clear sky. Velo Balul Balul Mamish. And the shita that says that it's Balul, which is Mar Zutra, he also doesn't mean it's perfectly cloudy. Ella, Afilu Balul V'ruach Tzvonis Min Ashavto, Zehu Barur. If it's a cloudy sky, but there's a northern wind blowing, so that's considered to be Barur. Amar Le Ra Rebbe. Rabbi Abba, the Rab Ashi, Anan, Ad Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi Masninan La. We hold like him. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Motzai Yom Tov Ha'acharon Shel Chag. Han Motzai Yom Tov after Sukkot, Hakol Tzofen LaAshan HaMa'aracha. Everybody looks up at this smokestack by the Ma'aracha, by the pyre. Not a klape tzafon, if in fact it's leaning a little bit to the tzafon, to the north. That means there's a southern wind pushing things north. And aniyim smechim uvalabatim atzevim. Poor people are thrilled, and the people who run the businesses are upset. Why? Because when there is a southern wind and it pushes the ma'arach a little bit north, what's happening? Well, that means that there's going to be a lot of rain. It's going to be a very moist year, and therefore uperos markivin. And therefore, the fruits are more likely when there's humidity, right? You always want to keep your fruits and vegetables in a dry place. If it's very moist, things start to mold. So what ends up happening when there's a lot of moisture and a lot of rain, the people who own businesses have to sell off their produce faster. What do you do when you have a need to sell things off faster? You lower the price, which means the aniyim are smechim and the balabatim are atzevim. That's what happens when they looked at the pyre on Motzei Chag. If it was leaning to the north, that all the aniyim were looking up, all the balabatim were looking up. They see the pyre move a little bit. Oh, so it moves north. Aniyim are smechim because, like Baruch Hashem, prices are going to be cheap this year. We're supporting our family. We're on a budget.
That one was that in both, or that one of those nisim that only happened in Bayis Rishon?
I don't know. I think was, what does that Gemara say, that there were 10 nisim that happened with the Beis Hamikdash? One of them was this. I don't know. Let's see if a quick look says anything. I don't know. Not sure. Okay, so all of that is Uperis Markivim. Now, Nota Klape Dorom, if when they were looking up at the smokestack, they saw, I don't know if smokestack is the right language. I don't even know what it was. It's a stack of smoke. It's like a smokestack we think is of a chimney. Plume? Yeah, it's the miracle. It's not normal. So if it was Nota Klape Dorom, if the wind was coming from the north and pushing the smoke a little bit to the south, then the exact opposite was Shranim Atzevim Ubalabatim Smechem. Then the balabatim, was going to be, they'd have enough rain for the produce to grow. They've harvested already, right? Because they've already, they already have food. They brought it in already. It's dried out. And now they know it's going to be a drier year. And because it's a drier year, so the Gemara says that the balabatim are smechim, because mipnei shegish meishanamu atim uperos mishtamra. They're going to be kept on the shelves longer. And because they are able to keep the produce longer, they don't have to rush to sell. And because they don't have to rush to sell, they can have normal market prices and their profit margins will be higher. Not a klape mizrach, if it's going to go to the east, so that means a western wind pushes the smoke to the east. Akol smechen, klape marav akol atzevin. If it's going to be to the west, which means an easterly wind, so then everyone's upset. Uraminhi, the Gemara says this is not so pasha what Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi is saying. Uraminhi, the Brisa says, Mizrach is la'olam yafeh. The east is always going to be good, and Ma'arav is la'olam kashe. Ruach tzvon is yafeh l'chitim. If the wind blows north, it's great for the wheat. B'shashe v'u shlish, only when it's a third grown. V'kashe l'zeisim b'shashe anitzu, and it's going to be bad for the zeisim with this wind that's tzvonis if there's only flowers. The flowers precede the olive. V'ruach drom is kasha lechitin. The southern wind is bad for wheat. B'shashev yushlish v'yafa l'zeitzim b'shashenitzu. So we have some steers in the brisa. And v'amar Rav Yosef v'tem amar Zosha v'tem Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak v'simanich. How would we analyze this? Because we've been talking about different products. So the Gemara says v'simanich shulchan b'tzafon u'menor b'daram. The shulchan is where we keep the lechem apanim in the Kodesh HaKodashim. In the Kodesh, I should say, in the Heichal. So there, when we're talking about the Shulchan, which is Lechem, that's talking about Chitin, so that's when it's better in the north. Well, menorah, when we talk about the menorah, which is lit with olive oil, so here we're referencing the olive orchards, so that's better B'dorim. So how do we answer this question? The Gemara says, Hi Marbi Didei, Hi Marbi Didei, Lo Kasha. It seems to be there's no problem. Halan Halu, it depends where you live. If you live in Bavel, which was a place of peaks and valleys, so that would have one impact on the climate. But if you lived in Eretz Yisrael, where you were on the top of the mountain, that would have a different impact on the climate. So there's no stira between these brises at all. One was just talking about Eretz Yisrael, one's talking about Bavel. Tanya, the brisa writes as follows: Abishol Omer Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. On Shavuos, Barur Simin Yafe, if it's going to be clear out, that Simin Yafe L'Kol Hashana Kula. So when we are out at night on Atzeres, and we look up at the sky and it's Barur, it's clear outside, that's a Simin Yafe for the whole year. Amr of Zvid, Ha Yom HaKama Deresh Shata, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, Ichamim Kula Shata Chamima. If it's warm on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, then the whole year will be warm. Ikarir, if it's cold on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, Kula Shata Karira, then the whole entire year is going to be cold. Okay, I'm going to just call it out. There's much more going on here than what we're seeing on the surface, right? These are agaritas and they're Omer Dorsheni, all of them. So the Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina. Who cares what the temperature is outside? What, are you not going to go to shul because it's cold out? You're not going to go, no, you're going to do your thing. We're B'nai Torah, we do our thing. So Lamai nafkamina. And as we turn to the top of Kuf Mem Zayin and Beis, we see the answer to this question. Litfilaso shel Kohen Gadol. How is he going to daven on Yom Kippur? That's what the Rashbam adds in here. Whatever he saw on Yom Kippur, he would daven for it. If it's too hot, he's going to say on Yom Kippur it should be the right temperature. If he saw that it's so cold, he's going to say it should be you should make it warmer. So he'll just modify his tefillah. Now, all of this is divrei agarta, of course, but where we started today was with the discussion of whether or not the matnas shchimera is a din deoraisa or not. And no, I shouldn't say that. I should say that if it is a din deoraisa, there are 4 mar mekomos. But here on the very top of Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, the Gemara says, "V'Rava Amar Rav Nachman matnas shchimera midrabanan." That really it's a midrabanan be'alma hi shemati tariv daito alav. Really, we shouldn't believe him at all, because there's no mechanics in halacha that say that dibur is enough to make a kinyan like that. Manash chimera shouldn't work, and really we should be concerned, the Shema Tarif Daito, that in the throes of death and the pain and all of the disarray that a person's going through when they're when they're a shchimera, so there we should assume he was to Tarif Daito, that he was not in a good mental state. So the Chachamim came along and said, Afal Pikein, we're still going to believe him. So it says the Gemara, Miyamar Rav Nachman Hachi. How can you say that Rav Nachman is of the opinion that a Mashchimera is believed because it's a din derabanan of Shema Tarif Daito? Amar Rav Nachman, Afal Gav de Shmuel, Afal Gav de Amar Shmuel, Amocher Shtar Chov lechaber v'chazar machul. Let's say I sell you a shtar chov. It's like one of these things where they have these TV shows where you buy a storage locker, whatever's in it is in it. You drop a couple $1,000s, and then you open up the thing. You find, what do you find inside? A shtar chov. So someone sold you a shtar chov. Shtar chov is worth $10,000. Givaldik. So then the halacha is, if the original person who is owed the money says, I no longer care to be collecting, I'm mochel, so the halacha is machol. Ve'afilu yoresh. If a yoresh is owed money and he says, I don't want it, then mochel as well. But, and here's where our halacha comes in. But if a shchimera makes a comment on his deathbed, there is no retracting. You're not allowed to then go back and say, I changed my mind. Whatever the shchimera says is binding. Now, and here's the Gemara, bringing its raya that perhaps matnas shchimei is a din deoraisa. And with this, we're going to conclude. Iyamris bishlama deoraisa mishum hachi enu yachal limcha. I could understand if you say that the din of a matnas shchimei is binding me deoraisa, and because it's a din deoraisa, you're not allowed to be choser. Got it. That makes sense to me. However, if the institution of matnas shchimei is only rabbinic in nature, why can't he be choser? Let the chacham, just like the chachamim institute. If the chachamim are the ones to institute the fact that a matnas shchimei is binding, then Pasha, they should be able to say that you can undo it as well. Elamai, it must be that it's a din deoraisa. So that's against this shita of Rav Nachman, Rava in the name of Rav Nachman. So that's the kasha in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, not true, and this isn't a surprising answer. The Gemara says, you're right. You're right in one way, but you're wrong in another. Really, it's Eina Shel Torah. Really, I'm right, says Rava in the name of Rav Nachman. Really, it's a din derabanan. Kasha. Well, if it's only a din derabanan, then I should be able to be choser on the matnas shchimei. Let's say that there's a matnas shchimei and then he's misrape. So the halacha is no, you're not allowed. Okay, it's a din deraisa. No, it's even a din derabanan. Ain't a shel Torah, but ve'asauha shel Torah. The chachamim, and we see this a lot. Called the tikkun rabbanon ke'ein deoraisa tikkun. When the rabbis institute halachos and they're mirroring after dina deoraisa, they try not to break any of the rules. Whatever the Torah said in its infinite wisdom, we don't break rules. So then you're right, midrabanan, they could have overridden it. But asauha kedivrei Torah, the asauha shel Torah, and they didn't want to break that. So we have now two distinct tracks, and the Gemara on its own doesn't actually give us an answer. When we started the Gemara today, we were trying to say here 4 psukim that teach us that the matnas shchimei is a din deoraisa. We saw some agaritas, and now we're seeing on the top of this page that perhaps Rava says in the name of Rav Nachman that a matnas shchimei isn't even a din derabanan. You're not allowed to be choser, and that should only be true by a din deoraisa. Yeah, you're right. It would be the case, except that the Rabbanan asau shel Torah, when they make a din derabanan, they are mirroring it after the Torah, and therefore you are not allowed to be choser. We're going to stop right here, about 8 lines or so from the bottom of Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, and we'll pick up from here tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.